All right, guys, are you ready for this? Are you ready for this one? The US is getting desperate, and the trade war is now hurting the bedrock of any major economy. We are, of course, talking about US farmers. This, this is tragic. This is a big lesson in cause and effect. The tariff war is one big decoupling of US-China trade. Everything is going to get affected and is bewildering. Trump and Bessent still doesn't understand this. Now, the drop is literally insane. U.S. imports from China went from $140 billion in 2020 to less than $65 billion in Q2 this year. That's cutting away half of Chinese goods. Do you think Beijing will be happy about this? Meanwhile, Chinese imports of U.S. goods also fell from $45 billion down to $24 billion in Q2. China's economy also isn't buying stuff from the United States. There's also a big problem with the type of goods being treated on both sides. Now, everyone knows that China is the world's factory, and they make everything from plastics all the way to EVs, from iPhones to vital machinery needed everywhere. But what does the US really export to China? Just think about it. Who really has the leverage when it comes to trade relations? It's amazing that Trump didn't figure this one out before he put a tariff war on Beijing. The US exports a ton of easily replaceable goods to China, and these are mainly fuels like oil and LG. Agriculture products are here as well, but the story is completely different for Chinese goods. The majority of Chinese exports to America are complex products, and this includes semiconductors, tech gadgets, telecoms, and industrial machines. And this should tell us of the true leverage. Who has more clout here in the trade war? And because Trump has made selling AI chips to China so difficult, Beijing sees the US as a gas station, with a bunch of farms attached to it. There's really nothing they can't get from the US elsewhere. Now, dumping US oil and LG isn't a worry. China can get it from Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, and of course Russia. Putin will sell President Xi all the oil and all the gas he will ever want, and it will be sold at a better discount than US energy. And now the same situation is being played out in US agriculture. China just doesn't want US farm products anymore. There's no grand conspiracy here. It's a simple, you block my trade, I'm going to block yours. And this is something that Scott Bessent just can't accept or understand. Chinese leadership has decided to use the American farmers, soybean farmers in particular, as a hostage or pawn in the trade negotiations, and American farmers overwhelmingly voted for President Trump more than 90%. He loves the farmers, he loves them. Now, if China is using soybean farmers as hostages or pawns, the same can be said with the US weaponizing AI chips. The real crisis here is Trump launching a trade war without a plan. While China's developed their own food supply chain, even before 2020, Chinese farmers have been moving into Russia. Over 350,000 hectares of farmland is leased or owned by the Chinese. And this is land being used to cultivate everything from soybeans to wheat to potatoes. Russia has an incredible amount of land, and Chinese farmers are rushing in to grow food. And with the China-Russian No Limits partnership, Chinese food supply in the Russian Far East will keep growing. It's another example of supply chains being built years before you actually need them. For direct exports, China doesn't need or want US soybeans as well. What is the point? Firstly, you benefit the Trump administration. Secondly, why not buy from your own BRICS partner? Agriculture is the lifeblood of many Latin American countries. China also has the world's biggest and fastest growing food demand. They have the consumer market to elevate South American economies. Ever since the first trade war, China has been relying more and more on the Brazilian friends. Soybean exports from Brazil has been climbing all the way from 2018 till today. Meanwhile, supply from the US is declining year after year. In 2024, China booked 6.5 million soybeans tons from the US. But this year, the export season opened with zero sales to China. China also has the option to buy their supply from Argentina. In fact, they already beginning to do so in 2025. And this is putting an enormous squeeze on US agriculture. Inventories are starting to build up, which leads U.S. farmers towards two difficult decisions. Either the food goes bad and wastage happens, or they start undercutting their own prices. Whether you turn left or whether you turn right, there will be a huge amount of money evaporating. Now, this glut of soybeans isn't like an oversupply of copper, iron, or gold. Those commodities can be stored indefinitely. You can't do the same with wheat, corn, or soybeans. They will eventually perish given enough time. The biggest problem facing U.S. farmers are the tariffs. Every input cost is going up. Simply put, American farmers are getting decimated. When your tractor doubles in price and construction costs are 20 to 30% higher, it will trickle down to your entire business model. We need more than anything is access to markets on a level playing field, and that includes China. Right now, with the trade war, and then the tariffs and retaliatory tariffs that have resulted, we're at about a 20% price disadvantage when it comes to what the Chinese have to pay for our soybeans versus the Brazilian soybeans. And this farmer is exactly right. Now, I bet you if the cost of soybeans from the US was 20% cheaper than Brazil, there would be no problem exporting them out. Maybe not to China, but to the rest of the world. It all boils down to economics. Yes, it's very easy to scold China, but everything stems from the trade war. And you would think that Trump will drop tariffs on Beijing to ease the tensions. But nope, the king of the world is going to ramp up the pressure once again. Trump is going to confront President Xi over Beijing's refusal to buy U.S. soy. He might revisit a Phase 1 trade deal where the U.S. would try to force China to buy a minimum amount of food exports. But is that really such a good idea? Let's really think this through because there are 1,001 ways China could ramp up the pain on U.S. farmers. Now don't forget that China has a ton of money from their trade surplus. Their cost of borrowing is half debt of the U.S., so Beijing can ramp up subsidies for their own farmers and become a food exporter down the road. It's not impossible. Trump would have to do a bailout for U.S. farmers. And the numbers are unsustainable at this point. The USDA projects U.S. farm debt to hit nearly $600 billion in 2025. I guess which is the biggest driver to this farm debt? It's interest rates. Since 2022, total debt has increased by nearly 20% due to rising borrowing cost. In addition to this mess, the tariff war is raising farm operating cost, and it's 35% of total farm expenditure. Guys, this is basic math. This isn't some Nobel Prize equation. And I don't care what Bessent or what Trump has to say. China is not really the problem here. It's the tariff war and the state of the U.S. financial economy, which is leaking into every single industry. But let's shift focus to another crisis in American supply chains, especially lithium. And by now, we know how important this mineral is. It's the key reason why China can push out affordable EVs to the world. It's a big reason why Bessent he's cornered in his trade talks with Beijing. Chinese control of rare earths is making it impossible for the US or any other Western country to compete in critical sectors. By 2030, the majority of lithium-ion batteries will come from China, nearly 70%. All the brands in red are Chinese EV or battery companies. Even BYD is going to make their own lithium batteries in enormous amounts, almost double the production of Tesla. And this is why Bessent is treading carefully when it comes to trade talks with Beijing. If China cuts away rare earth supply, many U.S. industries could either stall or suffer a production collapse. Washington has always been trying to catch up, but the trade war has tied their hands behind their back. The U.S. is trying to operate jumping on one foot. Now they have correctly identified China's weakness in the lithium supply chain. But once again, the tariff war is preventing the U.S. from taking advantage and actually formulating a proper plan. In the lithium supply chain, China has midstream and downstream dominance. It's a complete wipeout. Nearly 70 to 90% of the processing and making of EV battery cells are Chinese. There's simply no way to compete with China there. The processing plants have been built decades in advance, and they operate at a fraction of the cost. China has an abundance of cheap power. The only way to compete with China is in the upstream mining portion of the supply chain. China has around 15% of global supply here. The majority is located in Australia and Chile. But this is where U.S. trade policy is screwing Washington once again. The entire basis of the trade war is to bring manufacturing back home. It's also to reshore a ton of jobs back to Americans. That is the game plan. So, it's going to be unthinkable for Trump to go around and invest billions in Australian or Chilean mines or develop them elsewhere. And that's why we have weird actions from the U.S. government to buy back their own supply chains. The U.S. government just bought a 5% ownership stake in a lithium mining company in Nevada, and this is in partnership with General Motors to mine and process lithium from the Tech Pass. In other words, the U.S. wants to dig up lithium from the ground and process it domestically. Now, the issue we have here is the cost of production. It's not going to be a cheap endeavor. Mining and processing costs in the U.S. are way higher than China. China's operating at over 30% or even 40% discount in the entire lithium supply chain compared to the United States, which means Beijing can actually disrupt U.S. supplies. Global lithium miner shares collapse the moment China approved CL's mine reserves. In other words, CL is about to mine even more lithium on Chinese soil to supply the world. And when you mine in China, you get access to the best mining capabilities at a fraction of the cost. The only way for the U.S. to compete is to throw billions in subsidies to help their companies stay afloat. China can operate their mines at a cheaper cost versus the West, especially the U.S. And as prices continue to go down, mining in Nevada or anywhere else in the U.S. will get impossible without government money. Now the picture is very clear here. Either China will squeeze U.S. mines out of existence, or the U.S. government throws a ton of subsidies. The extra cost would then get passed down onto U.S. consumers, who ultimately get screwed. And this is basically the tariff war all over again. It's extremely bizarre, but here we are. The U.S. is losing the supply chain war because of impatience and hubris. You can't compress 40 years of effort into 4 years using tariffs as your weapon. It just won't work. But let's circle back to the soybean crisis. Now, what we are seeing is the refusal to admit that a trade war is destroying U.S. industries one industry at a time. It's clear as day why China isn't buying U.S. supplies. China isn't getting more from Brazil for nothing. It's about payback and higher U.S. prices. And here we have Scott Bessent again deflecting responsibility for U.S. farmers getting decimated. And Joe to go back on the egg purchases and President Trump's Phase 1 trade deal that was signed in January 2020. There were over 50 billion of egg purchases. The Chinese followed through during President Trump's term in 2020. And then under President Biden, their feet were not held to the fire for these egg purchases. And at the meeting in Geneva, when I asked them, why didn't you continue buying soybeans and the other products, they had one word. Guess what it was? Biden. Oh, that sounds like malarkey. But let me know what you think. Will China ever do a U-turn on U.S. soybeans? And can Trump really revive lithium mining in the United States? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through this crazy times.